What could make a hardened cowboy cross an entire churchyard just to sit beside the one woman everyone else refused to touch? The scrape of a wooden bench cut through the churchyard just as every conversation faded. Tin cups stopped clinking. A warm August breeze carried the smell of fresh biscuits, while one dusty cowboy calmly lowered himself into the empty seat beside her. Why would a complete stranger risk the whole town's anger for one silent woman? Tell me where you're watching from as we begin. Late August settled gently over Silver Creek, Colorado territory. The cottonwood leaves barely stirred above the churchyard, and the smell of smoked ham, fresh biscuits, and blackberry pie drifted through the warm afternoon air. Every summer, the church supper gathered ranchers, miners, shopkeepers, widows, and children around long pine tables covered with white cloth. It was the kind of day people remembered through the winter. Eliza May Carter stood at the edge of the church grounds with a covered glass jar held carefully against her waist. Blackberry preserves. She and Thomas had picked those berries together the previous August along the creek beyond Miller Ridge. He had laughed because she insisted every jar should be filled exactly to the same line. He claimed nobody would ever notice. She had answered that careful work mattered even when no one was watching. Now Thomas had been gone 6 days. She drew one slow breath before stepping toward the tables. The conversations continued. Children chased one another between the trees. Someone struck up a hymn near the church porch. Everything looked exactly as it had every other summer, until people noticed her. Martha Eldon saw her first. The older woman paused while unfolding her tablecloth. Her eyes met Eliza's for only a second before she quietly lifted her basket and carried it farther down the table. Robert Eldon followed without speaking. The Henderson family noticed. Then the Bakers, then the Whitmores. Nobody announced anything. Nobody pointed. The empty places simply widened around Eliza like water moving away from a stone. She reached the end of the table and carefully placed her jar beside an untouched stack of tin plates. 6 feet of empty bench stretched on one side, nearly the same on the other. She sat anyway. Her blue dress had been pressed before sunrise. The collar had been mended twice by her own careful hands. She folded those same hands quietly in her lap and looked toward the church instead of the people avoiding her. She had promised herself one thing before leaving her cabin. No matter what happened today, she would not leave first. Across the yard, Reverend Calloway welcomed everyone with a prayer. "A grateful heart," he began, "is the strongest foundation any community can build." Several people answered softly, "Amen." Eliza lowered her eyes. A grateful heart. She wondered whether a broken one counted. Near the water barrels, Sheriff Amos Pike stood speaking with Victor Langley, president of the Silver Creek Savings Bank. Pike rested one hand easily on his belt, while Langley nodded with polished confidence, his silver hair bright beneath the afternoon sun. Neither man looked toward her. Neither needed to. The town had already done their work. A woman stopped behind Eliza's shoulder. Clara Hennessy. "My husband lost $40, Clara said quietly. Eliza remained facing forward. "I know. It took us nearly 2 months to save it. I'm sorry." Clara gave a tired laugh that held no joy. "Sorry won't bring it back." "No," Eliza answered. "It won't." Silence lingered. Then Clara walked away. Eliza looked down at the jar of preserves. She remembered Thomas wiping blackberry juice from his chin with the back of his sleeve while insisting nobody would care if one jar looked different from another. She almost smiled. Instead, she tightened her fingers together beneath the table until the feeling passed. Hoofbeats interrupted the afternoon. Not hurried, not dramatic. Simply steady. People turned toward the church road. A lone rider approached beneath a thin layer of mountain dust. His bay horse walked with the relaxed confidence of an animal used to long trails. The rider sat straight, without stiffness, broad-shouldered beneath a weathered canvas coat. His hat shaded most of his face, But there was nothing uncertain about the way he looked across the gathering. He saw the empty space. He saw Eliza. He dismounted. Without asking anyone's permission, he tied his horse to the fence rail, dusted one hand against his trousers, and walked directly toward the table. Several conversations stopped. Sheriff Pike watched. Victor Langley watched. The stranger reached the empty bench. He nodded politely toward Eliza. "Afternoon, ma'am." She returned the nod. "Afternoon." He sat beside her, not across from her, not at another table. Beside her. The church yard became strangely quiet. The man reached for the jar of preserves, turned it gently in his hands, then set it back exactly where she had placed it. "Those look like they took patience." They did. He gave a small, approving nod. "I appreciate people who don't hurry good work." Then he slid his own tin plate closer to hers. "There's a place beside me." Something inside Eliza, held tight for 6 long days, nearly came undone. She swallowed before speaking. "You don't know who I am?" "No," he said calmly. "But I know what I just watched." He broke a biscuit in half. "I don't eat beside cowards." The words were quiet. They carried anyway. Sheriff Amos Pike crossed the churchyard with slow, measured steps. "You must be Caleb Rowan." "I am." "You've chosen an unfortunate place to sit." Caleb looked up without moving from the bench. "Seems comfortable enough." "The Carter family has caused this town considerable hardship." "So I've heard." Pike folded his arms. "You ought to choose better company." Caleb spread a little blackberry preserve onto his biscuit. "I already did." Several people lowered their eyes. Victor Langley remained perfectly still. Pike's jaw tightened. "You've been in the mountains too long." "Likely. You don't understand what's happened here." Caleb tasted the preserves before answering. "I understand enough to know one woman brought food to a church supper." He looked around the table. "The rest of you brought judgment." No one answered. Pike held Caleb's gaze for another long moment before turning away. Langley quietly followed him toward the banker's wagon. The afternoon never fully recovered. When the last dishes had been gathered and the wagons began leaving the church grounds, Eliza carried the half-empty jar toward the road. She expected Caleb to ride west. Instead, he walked beside her until they reached the fork leading toward her small cabin. "I'll head this way," she said. "So will I." She frowned slightly. "I've been riding around Briar Canyon for 3 days," Caleb said. She stopped walking. "Why?" "Because I've worked those ridges 11 summers." His eyes stayed on the fading mountains beyond town. "And because a man doesn't fall where they say your brother fell." The evening breeze moved softly through that cottonwoods. For the first time since Thomas Carter died, someone had spoken of him as though the truth was still alive. Eliza did not answer immediately. The evening road stretched quietly before them, the wheel ruts still holding warmth from the August sun. Crickets had begun their evening chorus along the dry grass, and somewhere farther up the ridge, a meadowlark gave one last call before settling for the night. She finally looked toward Caleb Rowan. "You knew the canyon?" "I've grazed cattle above Briar Canyon every summer for 11 years. And you think they're wrong." "I think something about it doesn't fit." Neither of them spoke again until they reached the split where the road climbed toward her cabin. Caleb removed his hat. "If you'll allow it, I'd like to stop by tomorrow morning." "Why?" "Because I found something." His answer was simple enough to leave no room for guessing. "I'll have coffee ready," she said before realizing she'd already made the invitation. He gave one quiet nod. "I'll be there after sunrise." Then he turned his horse toward the northern trail, disappearing into the growing blue of evening. Eliza watched until horse and rider blended into the foothills. She had expected another lonely night. Instead, she found herself wondering what a man had discovered among the rocks where everyone else had stopped looking. Morning arrived with clear skies and the smell of pine carried down from the higher slopes. Eliza had already hauled water from the well before Caleb appeared through the front gate. He dismounted without unnecessary ceremony. His horse stood patiently while he removed a weathered leather saddlebag. "I appreciate the coffee," he said. "You haven't even tasted it." I could smell it halfway down the road. That drew the faintest shadow of a smile across her face. Inside, the cabin was small but orderly. A pine table, 2 straight-backed chairs, a cast-iron stove, Thomas's Bible resting carefully on a shelf above it. Nothing in the room suggested wealth. Everything suggested careful hands. Caleb placed the saddlebag on the table and slowly removed 3 objects wrapped in a flour sack. "I found these above the canyon ledge." The first was a torn ledger page. Its corner had been ripped away, but neat columns of figures remained. Several entries carried the initials VL. Eliza leaned closer. "I know this handwriting." "You do?" "Thomas copied fund records every evening." She touched one number gently. "He formed his 7s exactly like this." Caleb unfolded the second item, a folded bank receipt. One edge had turned brown where old blood had dried into the paper. Eliza's breathing slowed. "He carried receipts folded like this." "You've seen him do it?" "Every payday." The third item was smaller, a broken piece of cedar fence post. Near its center sat a clean, round hole. Caleb laid it beside the receipt. "I dug this out of a fence rail 4 feet back from the cliff." Eliza frowned. "I don't understand." "If Thomas simply slipped," he pointed toward the hole, "there wouldn't be a bullet fired into a fence post behind where he was standing." The room became very still. Outside, wind stirred softly through the cottonwoods. Inside, one explanation after another quietly fell apart. "My brother wasn't running," Eliza whispered. "I don't believe he was." She lowered herself into the chair. Her eyes remained fixed on the ledger. "I remember something." Caleb waited. "He came home 2 weeks before he died." She looked toward the kitchen window as though seeing another evening entirely. "He asked if I had ever noticed numbers that almost balanced." "What did you tell him?" I laughed. She shook her head slowly. "I thought he was talking like an accountant again." "What did he say?" "He said," she paused, "good books tell the truth. Bad books try too hard to look honest." The words settled heavily between them. Caleb unfolded the ledger page completely. "I spent half yesterday comparing these entries with the county notices posted outside the bank." "And?" "Several withdrawals listed here were never announced publicly." Eliza looked up. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone moved money without expecting anyone to read every page." A long silence followed. Finally, she asked the question neither of them wanted answered. "You believe Thomas found this?" "I believe he found enough to frighten somebody." She rose and crossed toward the shelf above the stove. Opening a small wooden box, she removed several folded letters tied neatly with blue thread. "They're all from Thomas." Caleb watched quietly. He wrote nearly every week." She untied the bundle. One letter, dated barely 3 weeks earlier, caught her attention. She unfolded it. "Some figures aren't agreeing with each other," she read softly. "I may need another week before I'm certain. I don't want to accuse an honest man by mistake." Her voice stopped. Thomas had not suspected. He had been proving it. Caleb looked toward the front window. The morning sun still lay peacefully across the yard. Yet something beyond the fence caught his attention. Far beyond the cottonwoods, movement, a rider. Only for a moment, then gone behind the trees. He stood. "What is it?" "I don't know yet." He stepped outside onto the porch. The dust along the lane had not settled naturally. Fresh hoofprints crossed the road where none had been earlier. Someone had ridden close enough to watch the cabin, without announcing themselves, without stopping. Caleb remained still until the silence returned. When he came back inside, Eliza was already looking at him. "We're not alone anymore." "No. They know. I think they're beginning to." She folded Thomas's letter carefully. "What do we do?" Caleb looked toward the Bible resting above the stove. "The nearest federal marshal works out of Pueblo." "How far?" "3 hard days if the horses hold." "I'll saddle mine." "You should stay here." She met his eyes steadily. "No. It's dangerous." So was whatever Thomas found. Another silence. Not argumentative, simply honest. Caleb nodded once. "Then we ride together." Neither of them noticed the second rider hidden among the pine trees beyond the ridge. He watched smoke rising gently from the Carter cabin chimney before turning his horse back toward Silver Creek. Someone would be waiting for his report before noon. By dusk, Eliza had packed what she could carry in 2 saddlebags: a spare dress, 2 shirts, dried meat wrapped in cloth, cartridges for Thomas's rifle. The torn ledger page and blood-stained receipt rested inside Thomas's Bible, beneath the thin leather cover where no careless hand would find them. Caleb checked both horses at the rail. "We leave before first light," he said. Eliza tightened the strap on her bedroll. "I'll be ready." He looked toward the tree line. The last sunlight caught the tops of the pines, but the ground beneath them had already gone dark. "I'm staying nearby tonight." "You don't have to." "I know." That answer stopped her. Caleb did not offer explanations when none were needed. He simply led his horse toward the small rise beyond the cabin, where he could watch both the north trail and the road into town. Eliza went inside. She set coffee grounds in the tin pot for morning and laid Thomas's rifle beside the door. For a long while she stood before the shelf where his Bible had always rested. The empty space looked larger than it should have. Sleep came late. Smoke woke her. Not wood smoke from the stove, something sharper, hot pitch, dry pine, cloth beginning to catch. Eliza came out of bed barefoot and reached the front room just as orange light pushed through the cracks beside the door. The corner of the cabin was burning. She grabbed Thomas's Bible, her mother's photograph, the cartridge box, and the rifle. A beam overhead gave a low groan. Heat rolled across the room. Outside, hooves struck hard earth. 2 riders were leaving the ridge above the road. One turned long enough for the firelight to flash across a metal star pinned to his coat. Eliza did not call after them. She watched until the trees swallowed both men. Then Caleb was there, running down from the rise. He took in the flames, the saddlebag at her feet, the rifle in her hand. "Anyone inside?" "No." He seized the water barrel and threw what remained against the nearest wall, but the dry timber had already taken too much flame. Eliza stood in the yard as the front window broke inward. The chair where Thomas used to read disappeared behind smoke. The blue dress she had worn to the church supper hung inside the wardrobe. Gone. Caleb came back to her side. His sleeve was blackened near the wrist. "We have to move." She looked at the cabin once more. "They wanted the evidence. They wanted you frightened enough to leave it behind." Eliza slid Thomas's Bible into her saddlebag. Then they wasted their fire. They rode before the eastern sky had begun to pale. The trail climbed north through dry forest and loose shale. Below them, the last glow from the Carter cabin faded into the valley darkness. Caleb led them away from the main road, using old cattle paths and narrow game trails that wound toward the upper range. By mid-morning, Silver Creek had vanished behind layers of blue ridge. They stopped beside a cold stream beneath the pines. Caleb watered the horses while Eliza sat on a flat stone and worked a splinter from her palm with a sewing needle. "You should have told me to run when you saw the riders yesterday," she said. "Would you have?" "No. That's why I didn't." She looked at him. For the first time since the nick, his face softened. Only slightly. "You listen better than most men," she said. "I've spent 11 summers around cattle. They teach a man that making noise isn't the same as being useful. She lowered her eyes to the needle. Thomas would have liked that. Tell me about him. So she did. She told Caleb how Thomas repaired watches without charging widows, how he wrote every expense into small notebooks, how he feared spiders but would climb a frozen roof to mend a chimney cap. Caleb listened without interrupting. The trail grew rougher after noon. They crossed exposed shelves of red stone where the wind came hard from the west, and the valley opened far below. Near sunset, Caleb stopped abruptly. 5 riders stood on the ridge behind them. Sheriff Pike rode at the center. Even at that distance, the shape of him was unmistakable. They found us, Eliza said. Caleb studied the land ahead. Devil's Mesa starts beyond those trees. The trail splits after the creek crossing. Which fork reaches the telegraph road? South. Then you take it. He turned toward her. We both take it. They'll cut us off. Eliza, you have the evidence. You know Marshall Mercer. Caleb's jaw tightened. She continued before he could answer. The North Fork leads to the abandoned Miller claim. Thomas and I rode there when we were younger. I can draw them away and hide beneath the cabin. No. You said you understood I wasn't helpless. I do. Then trust me. Behind them, Pike shouted an order. The riders began descending. Caleb reached inside his coat and secured Thomas's Bible against his chest. At the Miller cabin, there's a root cellar on the east side. Stay below until daylight. I know. I'll send the telegraph and come back. Eliza held his gaze. I know you will. For one breath, neither moved. Then Caleb turned south. Eliza counted to 10 before driving her horse north through the trees, letting its hooves strike loudly enough to carry. A shout rose behind her. There she goes! All 5 riders followed. She bent low over the saddle and rode into the darkening pines, fear sharp in her chest, but her hands steady on the reins. South of the creek, Caleb Rowan carried the truth toward Pueblo. North of it, Eliza May Carter carried every armed man away from him. Neither had spoken of love. There had been no time, but each rode as though the other's life had already become something worth crossing a mountain to protect. Eliza reached the abandoned Miller claim after midnight. The cabin leaned toward the creek, as if the wind had been pushing against it for years. One shutter hung loose. The roof had lost shingles along the western side. Beneath a torn canvas weighted with rusted iron, she found the root cellar exactly where Caleb had said it would be. She led her horse inside the cabin, covered its muzzle lightly with her hand until it settled, then lowered herself beneath the floor. The cellar smelled of cold earth and old potatoes. Thomas's rifle rested across her knees. Riders passed twice before dawn. The second time, one horse stopped directly above her. Leather creaked. A boot scraped against the cabin floor. Eliza held her breath. Sheriff Pike's voice came through the boards. Check the creek. Another man rode away. For a long while, Pike remained. Then the floorboards groaned once more, and his horse followed the others north. Eliza waited until sunlight found the crack beside the cellar door. She had just stepped outside when hoofbeats came over the ridge. Caleb rode hard toward the cabin. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped and looked her over from boots to face. You're all right. I am. Her eyes dropped to the dark stain along his left side. You're hurt. It's a graze. Sit down. Eliza, we need... Sit. He obeyed. She cleaned the wound with creek water and wrapped it with strips cut from the cabin's least rotted curtain. Caleb watched her hands move, quick and certain. You reached the telegraph? Message went out before midnight. To Mercer? To Daniel Mercer in Pueblo. He'll ride. How long? 2 days, maybe less. Eliza tied the bandage tight. Pike knows we sent it. He will by now. Then we can't wait here. Caleb studied her face. You want to go back? I want every person in Silver Creek watching when I speak. By noon they were riding down from the mountains. The valley heat met them in a wall. Dust lay pale over the road. Curtains shifted in the windows as they entered town, but no one came outside. Victor Langley stood in the bank doorway, wearing his linen coat. He smiled as though he had been expecting them. Eliza dismounted in the center of Main Street. Caleb tied both horses and came to stand several feet behind her, near enough to act, far enough to leave the moment hers. Deputy Samuel Reed stepped from the sheriff's office. His hand rested near his holster. "Miss Carter, Sheriff Pike wants you inside. He can question me here." "Ma'am." "Here, Samuel, where the whole town can hear." A door opened across the street. Then another. Eliza raised Thomas's Bible. "My brother did not steal the Miners' Relief Fund. I have records showing unauthorized withdrawals signed with Victor Langley's initials. I have a blood-stained receipt from Briar Canyon and proof that a shot was fired where Thomas died." Langley came off the bank steps. "This woman is overcome with grief." Eliza turned toward him. "You counted on people believing that." His smile thinned. "No one wants to see you harmed, Miss Carter. Come inside and let sensible men handle this." "No." That single word carried farther than shouting would have. Reed looked at her, then toward Langley. Sheriff Pike emerged with 2 deputies behind him. "Eliza Carter, you are under arrest." "For what?" Pike stopped. "For interfering with an official investigation." There wasn't an investigation. More people came onto the sidewalks. Clara Hennessy stood outside the dry goods store. Martha Eldon appeared near the church wagon. Neither woman looked away this time. George Dutton crossed the street from the mine office. "Show me the papers." Langley stiffened. "George, this is not your concern." "My men's money makes it my concern." Eliza opened the Bible and handed him the ledger page. Dutton studied the figures. His thumb followed the repeated initials. Then Caleb produced the damaged cedar from inside his coat. Dutton examined the bullet hole. When he looked at Langley, the banker's composure slipped. Only slightly. It was enough. "Amos," Dutton said, "take your hand off that gun." Pike did not move. Deputy Reed did. He stepped away from the sheriff and faced Eliza. "I need to tell you something." Pike's voice cracked across the street. "Reed." The young deputy ignored him. "I heard them the night Thomas died," he said. "Pike and Langley. I was in the back office. They said the bookkeeper had to be handled before Thursday." The street went silent. Langley turned toward the bank. Caleb stepped into his path. "I wouldn't." "You have no authority." "No," Caleb said, "but I have time." Hoofbeats sounded from the north end of town. 4 riders came through the dust at a purposeful pace. The lead man wore a federal badge. Marshal Daniel Mercer pulled up in front of the gathering and took in the street with one steady sweep of his eyes. "Miss Carter?" "Yes, sir." "I received your message." Eliza held out Thomas's Bible. Mercer dismounted. "I'll need the full account." "You'll have it." Pike shifted one step toward his office. Mercer did not look at him. "Don't." Pike stopped. Samuel Reed removed the handcuffs from his belt. His hand shook once before becoming still. "Sheriff Pike," he said, "put your hands behind your back." For several seconds, no one breathed. Then Amos Pike obeyed. Later that evening, Mercer searched Thomas's boarding room. 7 small notebooks stood in a straight row above the desk. The last one, named Victor Langley and Amos Pike, listed every false withdrawal and recorded the date Thomas intended to report them. 2 days before he died. Eliza closed the notebook against her chest. Beside her, Caleb said nothing. His hand rested lightly against the doorframe, close enough for her to know he was there. Outside, Silver Creek had gone quiet again. But this time, silence was no longer protecting the guilty. It was waiting for the truth to finish speaking. Marshal Mercer worked through the night. By morning, the sheriff's office no longer belonged to Amos Pike. His desk held Thomas's notebooks, the torn ledger page, the blood-stained receipt, and every bank record Mercer's deputies could carry across the street. A loose floorboard in Victor Langley's back room led them to a locked iron box. Inside were $4,260, a second set of ledgers, and a folded letter in Pike's hand. The bookkeeper is asking inconvenient questions. Langley's answer had been written beneath it. Some questions are better answered before they are asked. Mercer read both lines twice. Then he looked at Eliza. That closes the door. Thomas's name was formally cleared before the week ended. The miner's money was returned. Notices bearing the territorial seal were posted at the bank, the mine office, and beside the church door where no one could pretend not to see them. Thomas James Carter had not stolen a dollar. He had discovered the theft. He had died trying to stop it. The miners came to Eliza with their hats in their hands. George Dutton stood with them, but did not speak for them. A weathered miner named Garrett Broad stepped forward. "My wife was going to take in laundry to replace the $40 we lost," he said. "She's got a bad back. We were angry, Miss Carter, and we put that anger where it didn't belong." Eliza looked along the line of men. "Silence helped Pike and Langley more than any gun," she said. "Remember that the next time this town decides someone is guilty before asking a question." Garrett nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Martha Eldon came later carrying beans and salt pork in a covered pot. "I moved first at the church table," she said from the doorway of Eliza's room at Mrs. Hale's boarding house. "Everyone else followed." "Yes," Eliza said. Martha lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." Eliza took the pot. "Then don't follow the next time." Clara Hennessy apologized too. Not with excuses, not with tears meant to purchase forgiveness. She stood in public and admitted she had known Thomas's character and chosen the easier story anyway. That mattered. Not enough to erase anything. Enough to begin. In November, Victor Langley and Amos Pike were convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and Thomas Carter's murder. Eliza sat in the territorial courtroom, wearing a dark green dress she had sewn herself. Caleb sat beside her every day. When the judge spoke Thomas's name and the word innocent entered the official record, Eliza did not cry. She placed one hand flat against the bench. Caleb's arm rested near hers. He did not touch her. He simply stayed. By then, Carter's Supply and Sewing had opened on 2nd and Mill. Thomas's name stood above the door in clean black letters. Inside were bolts of cloth, buttons in wooden trays, harness thread, needles, lamp wicks, coffee, and a ledger for customers who needed time to pay. Widows came. Miners' wives came. Travelers came in from the high road. Nobody was turned away because a town had decided something about them. Caleb returned to the upper range after the cattle settled. Eliza watched him ride north from the edge of town. "You don't have to come back," she told him. "I know." That answer again. Plain, certain. Weeks passed. The cottonwoods turned gold, then bare. On the first Saturday in October, hoofbeats stopped outside the shop. Eliza was measuring blue wool at the front counter when the bell above the door moved. Caleb entered with his hat in one hand and a parcel of good coffee in the other. "I found this on the trail," he said. She looked at the wrapping from the Denver grocer. "Must have been a well-stocked trail." "It surprised me too." She went into the back room and returned with a jar of blackberry preserves. The second jar, the one she had saved. Caleb set the coffee beside it. For a moment they stood looking at those two things together. "I can make supper," Eliza said. "I don't want to take up your evening." "Caleb," he met her eyes. "There's a place beside me." The words were hers now. Something quiet moved across his face. He followed her to Mrs. Hale's kitchen, where beans simmered on the stove and lamplight warmed the worn pine table. They ate slowly. They spoke of the mountains, the shop, Thomas, and the winter coming down from the high country. Outside, Silver Creek went on living. Not innocent, not fully changed, but no longer able to claim it had not known better. Caleb sat beside Eliza until the coffee cooled. The empty place that had once marked her shame had become something else entirely, a place chosen freely, a place earned through fire, truth, and the long road back from grief, a place where a cowboy had first sat because everyone else was afraid, and where he returned because at last it felt like home. I often wonder what I would have done if I had been sitting at that church supper. Would I have moved my plate with the crowd, or would I have found the courage to leave an empty seat untouched? Eliza's story reminds me that healing rarely arrives with applause. More often, it begins with one quiet act of decency. One person willing to stay. One person willing to listen. One person willing to believe that a good name is worth defending, even when the whole town has stopped asking questions. Thomas left behind careful records. Caleb offered steady loyalty. Eliza carried both through grief without allowing bitterness to become her future. In the end, justice mattered, but so did the life she chose to build afterward. A shop with her brother's name above the door. A supper shared without fear. A place beside someone who had earned her trust, one quiet moment at a time. If you've ever felt misunderstood, judged too quickly, or carried someone you loved in your heart long after they were gone, I hope a part of Eliza's journey stays with you. I'd love to know where you're watching from, and what moment in this story stayed with you the longest. If stories of courage, quiet love, second chances, and the enduring spirit of the American frontier speak to your heart, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more moving, mysterious, and healing journeys still waiting to be told.